This bright red object come up over the trees and actually started towards us. I got a hold of him and dragged him back into the cruiser. At this point, Officer Hunt showed up, because I called in saying that I was going to be out of the cruiser, so he had started out and he showed up. And I turned to look back at it, and it had turned and gone down towards the end of the field, about 100 yards away, and all three of us stood and watched it. It had no wings on it. It had bright lights around it, red lights. It did not give off a beam like many lights give off. It more of a glow like a neon sign. And there was no plane in the area that night. We just watched it head towards the coast, and it disappeared over the horizon. It made no noise. Now the horses and the animals around there apparently could hear some kind of a noise, because the horses were kicking the sides of the barn. Some people were seeing it before them, but they didn't say nothing about it. They're afraid people would laugh at them.
Well, Ray, you've yourself, of course, performed many investigations of so-called sightings, haven't you?
Yes, I've performed quite a few investigations, especially during the last few years.
Well, recently, I don't know the exact date, it was last month, I think around the 9th, if I'm not mistaken, there was a sighting of some sort in New Hampshire. Are you aware of this?
Yes, I personally investigated this sighting. It's one of the best we have in our local NICAP subcommittee files.
Can you tell us
about it? If you'd like, I'd like to tell you about it. The sighting took place on September 3rd of this year, last month, in the Exeter, New Hampshire area. Officer Bertrand of the Exeter Police Department was patrolling the roads around Exeter around 12:30 in the morning, early in the morning. He came across a woman all alone parked in the car, and he was very interested to see what she was doing there, so he pulled up to the car and said, what's wrong with you? And she could hardly talk. She was so frightened. She said that she had been chased by this egg-shaped object, surrounded with a red glow and with pulsating red lights. Well, he thought the woman was either drunk or something was wrong, and he talked to her and tried to comfort her, and he didn't even bother to take the woman's name and address. He just shrugged his shoulders, he said, and drove off and left her there. About a half hour later, he said, as he's patrolling along the roads, he gets an emergency call from the police headquarters at Exeter to report immediately that a boy, Norman Muscarello, hitchhiking between Amesbury and Exeter, was chased along Route 150 by the same object. He was almost in a state of shock by the time he got to the police headquarters. And he was told to report immediately to pick this boy up and go back and make an investigation. And he was pretty mad at himself for not getting the woman's name and address at that time.
I'll bet.
To make a long story short, he brought the boy back to the field, still not really believing the boy's story, but interested enough to make an investigation.
Well, these are reputable police
reputable
officers.
police officers, right. We have checked their background. In fact, the Saturday Review has checked their background thoroughly before. I don't know if you're aware of it. They carried a story on our investigation. Mm-hmm. But back to the sighting. Let's start with Norman Muscarello. He was hitchhiking between Amesbury, Massachusetts and Exeter, New Hampshire. And he was going along this farm road, and all of a sudden, to his right, the whole field lit up, a bright red glow. He said it was just almost as bright as dawn or daylight. And he looked, and this object, about 85 to 90 feet in diameter, was coming across the field directly at him. It was carrying 5 bright red pulsating lights, which flashed in sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 over and over again. And as it moved across the field, it was tilting. He took one look and got up against the stone wall, terrified. The object continued across the field and stopped and hovered over a house a bare 30 feet from the boy. It stayed there for a long 5 minutes, and then it moved back over the field. Norman got up and started pounding on the door, and here it was about 1:30 in the morning, and he woke Mr. and Mrs. Carl Russell up, and they came to the window and looked out, and he shouted, "I'm been chased by a flying saucer, let me in." And they thought he was drunk or something. They wouldn't let him in at all and told him to get lost. So poor Norman took off down the road toward Exeter. He was picked up by a car and was brought to the police station, and that's where Officer Bertrand comes into the act. Officer Bertrand returned to the field. They walked across the field together, flashing the officer flashing his flashlight around, looking for the object. And Bertrand said that he was just about to give up when the boy yelled, "Look out, here it comes." And sure enough, He said at treetop level, coming right at them, was this big object carrying 5 bright red pulsating lights. Bertrand said that the boy just stood petrified, and he himself drew his revolver before he knew what he was doing. And the object stopped momentarily and then tilted and started right at them. Bertrand said it came so close that all he could see was red, and he had the feeling that he was going to get burned, although he didn't feel any heat. He yelled for the boy to take cover, and the boy couldn't move, so he grabbed the boy and practically dragged him across the field to the cruiser. Meanwhile, the object stayed out over the field, a mere 500 feet away from the cruiser, tilting back and forth. No noise at all. A call was made to Exeter Police Headquarters to send another cruiser, and Officer Hunt arrived on the scene shortly after. Both the officers and the boy watched this object for 10 minutes before it moved off.
And did it move off, Ray, at tremendous speeds, as most reports indicate?
No, it didn't. It moved off very slowly, tilting as it went. No sound whatsoever. It's very interesting to note, however, that the horses in the adjoining barn were making a terrible noise, kicking their stalls, and the dog across the street was howling. The Air Force was very interested in this when they made their investigation the next day, and an interesting question asked the residents in that area. They asked them if their chickens woke up, if their chickens were affected.
Is that so?
And this is because a chicken has a different hearing range than a horse or a dog or a man.
In other words, there might have been a sound of this thing which the human ear couldn't have heard, but maybe chickens did.
That's right.
Okay, we're 13 after 11. Our guest this morning, Ray Fowler, who is associated with NICAP. He's chairman of the local subcommittee. A moment ago, Ray, we were talking about a UFO up in the Exeter, New Hampshire area, and you gave quite a description of the people who spotted it, including a couple of officers. I understand a little later on in the Amesbury News, they ran an article which said the UFO identified in that area was an advertising gimmick. And it said that it was a flying billboard which contains about 500 high-intensity lights that spell out an advertising message. Now, I know you followed up this article and found the truth to be...
Every time this advertising plane flies, it is owned by Skylight Advertising Company in Boston. It causes UFO reports. Hayden Planetarium, Smithsonian Institute, and ourselves receive a UFO report practically every time it flies. Of course, every time we make an investigation of any UFO sighting, which sounds similar to this advertising plane, we call up the company's manager and get his exact flight plan for that night. The advertising plane, never left the ground at Beverly Airport between August 21st and September 10th. So this would rule out the advertising plane. The company's manager also said he doesn't advertise between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning over farms.
Plus the fact, I'm sure he has a motor in that thing which makes a noise.
That's right.
And the other, of course, was silent.
Hello.
Yes?
This is the UFO show there?
Yes, ma'am. This is Fred Gale. You had a question or something?
Well, no. I was going to tell you about some sightings I'd seen.
Oh, well, good.
2 very close ones. And I'll tell you, before July 29th, if you had said too much about UFOs, I'd say, well, maybe. I'm sorry. Now I know they exist. The 29th of July, my daughter and I were up in Hampton Falls having coffee with a friend of mine. We started down the road about 11:30 to go home. And it's quite a dark road and woodsy. So there were bright red and white lights streaming to the middle of that road. And I said, well, we'll slow down. There's a car accident here. Well, we get up to where the lights were, and the white lights had gone off, but you could still see the red ones. And I said, well, gee, there's no cars here. Well, where are they? So we stopped. And I said, well, gee, where's the cars? I mean, where are the lights coming from? So Sherry was sitting on the other side of me, and she looked outside, and she looked up. And she says, well, up there. I says, in the air? She says, well, look. So I had to lean over. And then there hovering about 8 to 10 feet off of the ground was this oval-shaped thing. Now, I could not see the body of it this time at all. It was just bright green lights streaming down on the sides, and there were red ones out, onto the front. And they hit my car, the lights. And we sat there for perhaps 4 or 5 minutes, and the thing was rocking side to side. It had no noise. So, anyways, we were just discussing it, and she got scared, and she was almost in hysterics, and she locked the door, and we did roll the windows up. And she says, it's awful looking. I says, well, maybe it's a plane. She says, well, how come there's no noise? She says, it looks like something out of Phantasmic Features. And it's true, it did. It was very, very weird. So then it started rocking faster, and it went up a little. Then it looked like it was going to jump on my car, and it scared me, you know? So we took off, and I made a watch all the way home to see if the thing was anywhere near us. Well, when we came home, we stood out on the lawn, and at what I call a 45-degree angle, we saw this oval object, which was a silvery white, take off and go up into the sky and disappear. It had red, green, and white lights on it. Then we didn't think too much more about it, you know. And I didn't dare tell anybody. And finally, a couple of days later, it bothered me so much. I mean, I just couldn't believe that I'd seen the thing. I told my girlfriend about it. She asked me to call Pearce Air Force, which I did. And I asked them about balloons and so on and so forth. And I know a few things about them because I've lived near the base here and I've lived near planes down in Massachusetts, you know. So I described it to them. And they told me that it was a UFO. And they had to translate that because I didn't know what that meant. It's flying saucer, they called it. So then in September the 16th, my girlfriend and I were out again, just around, you know, looking around. We had started seeing things that didn't look right. So we kept looking, you know, night after night. So anyway, the 16th, I guess it went into the 17th. It started up at a field here in Route 88 in Hampton Falls. And we saw 6 of these long red things. We don't know what they were. There was something we hadn't seen before. They fly below tree level. They had an uneven pattern. We saw 6 of those there. And then we saw, of course, I don't know if people believe this or not, but stars can walk, and they're not really stars. Not all of them. I don't mean them all. And anyways, we saw all that there. So we took a ride down the road. And my girlfriend said to me, she says, you know, she says, there's 2 objects following us. And I told her, I said, well, you're foolish. I said, they don't follow. Things can't follow you. And I really didn't believe it, so we stopped the car. There were 2 objects, and they were large, and you might say that they were large stars, you know? So one kept going with us. The other one seemed to drag back. All right, we get down the corner of Ashbrook Road and this 88 Road, and this thing assumed a different shape. It looked long, with red in the front and red in the back and a little bit of orange. So that's all right. So we went down the street. We kept going. We stopped, and I mean, you have to see it to believe it. This thing stopped when we stopped. When we went fast, it went faster. When we went fast, it just went a little ahead of us, you know? All right, it followed us up and down roads. It made, when we turned, in a U-turn in the street, which I did, it went across the, to the other side, my right, and it was way below tree level. It kept right up with us. So out on 101, Route 101, I stopped the car. And this thing was ahead of me. It went ahead of me. It stopped right in midair, and there was no noise to it. I stopped the car, and we got out underneath, right out of the car on the ground there. And this thing turned and came back at an angle, and it went right over my car. All right, we got a very good view, and I had a camera, which I tried to get a picture of it. I didn't get it. It come out. But this thing, to me, the front of it was oval-shaped. It had what I call either short wings or fins. I don't know what you want to call it. It was long-bodied, and it had, like in the back, a split, like I call a fin, flat though. Then underneath of this thing, there was what I call a cabinet or a carriage, whichever you please. And it had square windows in it, which were illuminated, but you couldn't see anything other than a light coming from it and what might have been a ceiling or something, you know. All right, this thing was a dull metal. And it's what I would call a Hammett effect. This thing was no more than 8 to 10 feet over our head. And it was a dull metal. It had lights all over it, larger lights around the edges of it, you know? And it was red, green, and white, and orange lights on that thing. Now, I don't know what it is. We went to Pearce Air Force again. We called, and they asked us to come up. We did. And
these 2 gentlemen are all excited here. They'd love to.
I never believed this.
Well, they would love to sit down and talk to you about it. Could we get you to give your name to our directors? They could call you sometime.
Yes.
Would that be all right?
Very interested in this.
Well, they are quite interested. I can tell you that.
They're still around here. Believe me, I don't care. They are. There's over 100 people in this area have seen these things.
Uh-huh. Well, Steve, you any questions?
Well, would you mind telling us what area that is?
This is Hampton, Exeter area.
Hampton, Exeter.
Now, if you remember, there were police and a boy that made the newspapers. I didn't want my name used, period, because, people do think you're not quite right.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
I saw this. The first one I saw was July 29th, and I had reported it 2 P's a couple of days later.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's certainly most interesting, and I wonder if it's the shape at all relates to what was seen and published,
You mean the Exeter?
the one seen by Mr. Muscarello.
Oh, you mean, yeah, I know him. I know the boy. Well, the first one was that I say that this thing can assume different shapes. I don't mean the metal can change. It absolutely cannot.
Yeah.
But by changing the lights, it can look different. We've seen it quite large, right down the head of this street, and a whole bunch of kids have seen it, and neighbors. And I have a girlfriend that is a grown woman, too, and she's been out with me, and we have seen these things many times. The nearest were with Doris and I when it flew over my car, and when Sharon and I stopped by the side of the road, and they were very near.
Do you have any idea at all where this thing might have its home base, perhaps, in that area?
Don't you think I would love to know that? I mean, no, but I'm going to tell you. Well, I'll tell you, 88's field, I don't care. You can see these things many, many times, and you tell me, when you sit, I mean, you have to sort of study these things, you know? I mean, in the beginning, now, we'd seen other things after that July thing because it bothered me. I mean, I thought I'd lost my mind, really. And I just kept going out and going out. And finally, these things we've seen, it's amazing what they are. I have a daughter that sat with me and saw 3 so-called stars come right down and take a shape of, so that you could see metal on 2 of the craft, and the other one, the long red thing.
Madam, if you don't stop this, you're going to make a believer out of me.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. If you told me this before the 29th of July, I'd say all things are possible, but I want to see it first.
That's what I say.
That's exactly how I felt. But you show me what I saw and tell me where it comes from. And if you can give me a legitimate answer for it, I'll believe you.
Well, that's interesting. Would you hold on so we can give your name to our director, please?
Okay.
Thanks for the call.
All right.
Good night.
They just saw something chasing them down a road. Well, what road was this on? They were on Route 88. Headed into town on Route 88. I turned the cruiser on, headed out that way, and they followed me. I get out to the junction of 88 and 101C. I don't know if you've seen it or not. New county buildings out there. The big building. All of a sudden, to my left, and up almost to the top of my windshield. Almost as if I was looking out the wing window, but I was just to the right of the wing window. Mm-hmm. I saw something very, very bright moving across the sky, sort of southeast. It's the best direction I can get for it. It was very bright. I pulled the car over the side of the road, stopped the engine, turned the lights off, got out, walked, maybe 15, 20 feet from the car to get away from any noise there might be. I saw no noise at all. Very, very quiet. One real bright white light. Just as white as it could be.
Was it just hanging there?
No, it was moving. In back of the white light was a green light, and it seemed to be in back of that was a red light. The 2 colored lights were blinking, and this other light was a steady light. Now, when this thing passed over the building, it was, I estimated about 50 feet over the building. It cast a extreme light on the upper story of the building. In other words, if the building was bathed in light, it's the best way I can picture it. It kept moving steadily.
Did you hear anything?
No, I didn't hear a thing. Very quiet. Now, this is 11:15 at night, and there's no traffic or anything. So everything was very quiet. And if the thing was making a noise, I'd have heard it. But it was very quiet. It moved parallel to 88 over the woods. There's woods on the left-hand side of Route 88. It stayed over the woods, but it seemed to run parallel to the road. Well, I got back in the car and I stayed with it all the way down the road. Probably, I'd say a mile and a quarter, maybe a mile and a half. Down that road, there's another intersection of a small rural road.
Ashbrook?
Ashbrook Road, right. Just after Ashbrook Road on the left, there's a large field. Imagine Mrs. Pearce told you about this. We pulled into the driveway of the Burwell farmer across from this field. Mm-hmm. Again, I turned the lights off, the engine off, got out and watched. Things seemed to hover over this field, probably for 15 seconds, and it dropped to maybe what looked like to me it was 10, 15 feet off the ground. All the time, these lights were in the same pattern. They didn't change. And again, this field was bathed in light right under the thing. It seemed to be just as bright as it could be. Well, I tried to edge over toward the road and get closer to it. The thing all of a sudden just jumped and just disappeared.
Straight up?
And after it did that, right back down again. But when it came down this time, it came down in back of these trees. I could tell it was in back of the trees at the edge of the field, because you know when, say you turn up somebody's driveway, you see a car turning up towards you on the driveway, you see these trees in front of the lights.
Right.
In other words, the lights in back of the tree.
Yeah.
Well, this is just what this looked like.
But you can see this brilliant white light shining
Right,
through it.
right.
How far down behind the trees did it appear to go?
It looked like it was just about the same altitude as it was before, 10 to 15 feet.
In other words, it just sort of hopped over the trees,
Seemed to, yes.
high, and came right back down
Right.
again. How long would it take the hop lasted? You know, from when it sprang up in the middle of the field to when it came down again at the other end of its trajectory?
Well, maybe 10 seconds. I didn't think of it. It happened so fast.
How high did it get up before it began to come down again?
I wouldn't want to say it was up quite a ways.
Could you see a separation between the red light and the green light and the white light?
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Did this separation get smaller, like things
No.
shrank because
No.
of distance?
Yeah. When it moved away from me, they got smaller, but the separation stayed the same.
Separation relative to each other, say this.
In other words, the two lights didn't seem to be moving independently. It seemed like one unit.
Get an estimate of size of the object. Could you give us that?
Did you see any physical?
No. I tried to pick out something. I tried to pick out, like an outline of something. I couldn't do it. Of course, like I say, this white light dominated everything.
How big was the white light? I mean, there was a mass object of light that you could see. How big was that massed object?
For instance, when it passed over the county building, how big was it compared to, let's say, one of the windows or the door or...
It was much larger. The entire thing, to me, it looked like about the size of a house.
White? The size of a house?
The whole thing.
The whole
This
thing?
is the white,
Yeah.
plus the green, plus the red.
Were the
What was
green-
in between
Yeah.
or what was outside, I can't tell. It may have been much bigger.
Were the green and red like lights?
They were alternating.
Or were they
flash?
patches?
They seemed well defined.
They were, well, like for instance, that light bulb over there.
Right.
Yeah. And the white light
Wasn't defined as much.
Was it the same size as the...
No, much bigger.
Much bigger.
Much bigger.
It was physically as if it was a large globe. Was it... It was fuzzy. In other words, there was...
It seemed to be round, but I couldn't pick a different circle. The other ones I could.
The other ones like lights.
Right.
Sharply defined.
But they looked to me like traffic lights. That's the only thing I could think of.
Same kind of color, right?
Yeah.
One of the interesting things, people say, well, why green and red, stuff like that, Well, the thing is that the human eye will respond only to a limited range of colors. I mean, you can't get any other colors except the colors that we see because we see the spectrum in a certain physiological way. So just because it looks like a green and traffic light doesn't mean that it is. So I just wanted to point that out for anybody who might need it pointed out.
Yeah.
Then what happened after it went down behind the trees?
It just disappeared. It either went out or it just seemed to disappear. I never saw it again.
You couldn't see it through the trees?
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah.
I saw the trees.
Oh, I see.
In front of it. In other words, it was behind the trees. The trees were between me and this object, whatever it was.
How far away are those trees from you? In other words, you were on the road.
Probably half a mile.
And you were, in other words, the separation between where it started from and when it came down again was at least half a mile.
Well,
we could easily find out.
I estimate the distance between the road and that line of trees. Half a mile. Now that thing...
How big is that field?
It's a good sized field.
And you say it was about in the middle of it?
Yeah. It was about in the middle when it came down.
At 11:45?
Yeah.
Yeah. When you saw Mrs. Pearce and her friend, did you not get her friend's name?
I don't know what the friend's name was.
How did they describe this to you?
Well, they said that something in the air was following them. That's what they saw. So I cleared it with headquarters that it was all right for me to go down and check it out, and I went down.
Now, I understand that
From there,
Cottrell picked this up on his home radio,
Right.
and that he passed you talking to them at Ashbrook.
That's right.
Did you come back and check with them?
No, I didn't. I went back to headquarters. I came back here.
When were you talking to them at Ashbrook?
Right around midnight. See, we change shifts at midnight.
Yeah.
Another shift comes on. I come in to pick up a man.
What did you do after the light went out?
I was there for, maybe a minute.
Were you talking to them?
Took off, yeah.
Mrs. Pearce?
Yeah.
Was this when Lieutenant Cottrell passed you?
He passed me down the end of Ashbrook Road. I had left the spot where I watched the thing and come down Ashbrook Road to the Hampton Road. Ashbrook Road goes between the two state routes.
Have you ever talked about this with him?
Briefly.
Because he says that he saw something. After he passed you, he went down the road.
Yeah.
And that he saw something. A brilliant light for maybe 3 or 4 seconds.
Yeah.
Went down to turn around, came back, and it was gone.
Mm.
And he said it lit up the field.
Yeah.
Now, which road would he have gone down? He didn't go down
88.
88. Well, then it was back in the center of the field that...
I wouldn't want to say where I was, because I didn't see it, but that's the impression I would get.
In other words, when he left, if I can interpret this right, and we'll check it out, it came back. And then disappeared when he came down again.
Right.
I don't know.
What was your first reaction upon seeing the object?
No, automatically, I thought of this thing that the other fellows had seen. Of course, you talked to Eugene Bertrand.
Yeah, this morning.
I thought of this kind of thing.
Any ideas?
Did it frighten you at all?
Not really.
Did you have any
kind of a nosy type?
Did you have any sensation at all when you saw it? Was there any physical sensation?
No.
There was no noise at all,
No.
then? And you didn't feel any physical reaction to it? Then?
And when you stood out there watching this, how long did you watch it before it went away? Before it you hopped, as you say?
All told, probably about 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Did you feel anything?
No.
Okay.
Just a lot of curiosity. That's about all.
Now, this light, let's get back to the white light again. Was this a light like a very well-defined light, or was it was it like a glow?
It wasn't well defined. No.
It was rather fuzzy.
But it was more. I hesitate to call it a glow because a glow, in my way of thinking, that word.
Well, think of a glare.
Glare would more.
Yeah. In other words, same kind of sensation you get looking at high beam.
Yeah, looking right into a spotlight.
High beam spotlight.
But it wasn't spotted at me, obviously. It was spotted on this field and on the county building. Because the area in which I wasn't being lit up.
Oh. Of course, you were quite far away from it. That was right directly under it. Could it have been, like, for instance, casting light in all directions?
Mm.
Or did you get the impression there was a beam of light beamed down and you were just getting sort of a
That's the impression I was getting. Because it seemed to so bright, it would light up the patch of field and
would you say that it was lighting up the field about as bright as sunlight would have? In other words, were things sharply defined?
It was different than sunlight. It was whiter.
It was white.
Almost like fluorescent light.
Oh, so there was nothing yellow
You know the
to
difference between fluorescent light and
tungsten, tungsten lamps.
Very, very white.
To me,
sunlight isn't white.
Yeah. Did you, for instance, compare it with headlights?
It's much brighter than headlights.
Yeah. But how about color-wise? Because headlights are different colors than these kind of lights.
Just as white as it could be.
White as it could be. Any idea what it might have been?
Not really. I got my own imaginative ideas. Nothing
Would
to
you
base
like to
it on.
advance them for us? We're open to all suggestions, I'll tell you that. We've talked to so many people.
You probably heard everything I had to say.
No, it would be interesting.
I believe these things are some sort of spacecraft, but I'm not going to substantiate it.
Well, of course, you talked to Bertrand.
Oh, yeah.
And Hunt.
Sure.
And the Trust Officer Page?
Oh, yeah.
Sergeant Page?
Yeah.
Did he tell you what he saw?
We might point out that we're at the point now where we had come up here half believing that there was something, and after talking to people like you and Mr. Bertrand and Sergeant Page, there's very little doubt. I'm not going to speak for Dick, but there's very little doubt left in my mind that there is something. I'm confident now, after talking to the people we have, that there's something. And while I'm not willing to say right now that it's extraterrestrial, I'm willing to say that it's something very, very strange.
I think, as Dr. Heineck has pointed out, there is a scarcity of theories. That we are limited because people instinctively think that it's impossible to design a vehicle such as this appears to be a sample of. There are a number of them, a number of different configurations. In other words, as diversified, it seems, as a Mustang is from a Chevrolet as is from a Cadillac.
100 years ago, people said it's impossible to design a submarine. Who knows? Of course, they persecuted Leonardo da Vinci for making a helicopter.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Do you know much about the sky? In other words, are you familiar with constellations or
I used to be.
Can you find your directions using
sometimes
the North Star?
I can pick out certain constellations if I see them.
Have we talked to him about the direction in which this traveled away from him?
Yeah, well, this would let's see. 88 goes east and west, right? 88 goes at an angle southeast to northwest. And if this was on a field beside 88, and it jumped over
traveling southeast, and
it would travel southeast and southwest northeast in that line.
When I first saw it, it went southeast. Didn't change direction.
When you first saw it, it was heading southeast, in other words, parallel to 88.
Right.
Then it sat over this field.
Right.
Then you say it jumped up and moved down to trees beyond about a half a mile up on the other side of the road.
That's what I would call east.
No. That would be directly east then.
Let me say something else. You know, we talked to Mrs. Pearce this afternoon, and she told us this story, and I reserved any further judgment. As a matter of fact, Dick and I were sitting at dinner, and he asked me about it, and I said I reserve any further judgment. Not only have we confirmed it through you, but the lieutenant confirms basically the same thing. How can we say anything but? This is just the case.
All right. We have proven beyond any question of doubt, that there is something appearing in this area. The next step is to get a picture, and this is what we want to try to do. And I would like to thank you very much for the time that you've taken in telling us.
Well, I hope I did some help here. And you want to thank the lieutenant for allowing me.
Okay.
In Exeter, New Hampshire, in September of 1965, Air Force investigators arrived at the home of Norman Muscarello, and Norman learned that going public about his UFO encounter was a dangerous endeavor.
They came in my mother's kitchen, asked where I was. He said, "Where's Norm?" She says, "In the living room." And he marched right out there without asking or anything. And he said, "You, shut your mouth. Don't you say another word." Exactly what did you think you saw? He was trying to say to me that I didn't see what I saw.
What Norman Muscarello claims he saw was a brilliant UFO in a field next to his Exeter home. On September 3rd, 1965, Norman was walking home just after midnight.
I got right over to this stone over here, I'd say close to this stone wall, and this is when this thing appeared, and it was like it came out of nowhere. I was just zap. All of a sudden, there it was, big as a house up over these trees.
And he observed this craft hovering over a home right next to where he was. The home was completely bathed in red light. The area was bathed in red light. There was no sound.
When Norman reported his encounter to the local police, he found out he was not alone.
There were other sightings that night that made it interesting. In fact, prior to Norman seeing the UFO, Officer Bertrand came upon a woman motorist that was parked the side of the road, and she described a similar object that had chased her.
In fact, there were a total of 6 reports filed with the Exeter police on the night of September 3rd, 1965. It was the number of credible eyewitnesses and the consistency among their descriptions that drew Raymond Fowler into the case. Fowler is one of America's preeminent UFO investigators. He has worked on many landmark cases, including the Allagash abduction. At the time of the Exeter sightings, Fowler was a member of NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena.
Our mission was to investigate UFO sightings, make them available to interested scientists who are studying the phenomena, and make this information public.
For the past 30 years, Fowler has followed through on Norman Muscarello's story. His investigation of the incident at Exeter is now considered one of the most extensively documented UFO sightings.
What made this case interesting to me was the fact that an object as large as a barn was seen within 500 feet of witnesses.
As the early reports began to come into police headquarters, Officer Eugene Bertrand was called in from the field. After listening to Norman's story, they drove together to investigate the area.
He pulled his cruiser up on the other side of the road, and we proceeded in this direction, down this way. He had a large seal beam flashlight in his hand.
At that point, police officer David Hunt drove up and joined the foot search.
And they walked out into the field, and Norman yelled, "Look out, here it comes," and up over the treetops comes this object right at them with the red flashing lights.
And come up over the tree line in this direction. Moved this way, that way, back and forth this way, and then moved in that direction and headed eastward.
When the UFO moved away, Norman and the two officers returned to the police station. At the same time, a local reporter was filing this story for the Exeter newspaper. And the police and the press weren't the only ones investigating the UFO sightings. Officials at nearby Pease Air Force Base became involved. First, they interviewed officers Bertrand and Hunt, and then Norman Muscarello, who claims he was told not to talk about what he had witnessed.
I have no question in my mind, they're covering up something.
I'm thoroughly convinced that the federal government, whether it be the Army, Air Force, Navy, was out actively researching, trying to figure out what was going on.
It is significant that the Exeter sightings were in very close proximity to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard and Pease Air Force Base.
UFOs seem to have a keen interest in places where atomic weapons are either stored or atomic energy is being generated. This includes places like the Portsmouth Navy Shipyard, where you have atomic submarines. It includes places like Pease Air Force Base, where atomic weapons are stored.
Fowler believes that the Air Force launched a disinformation campaign, suggesting the Exeter UFO was a late-night advertising gimmick.
It was a classical case where you had reliable witnesses seeing an object that they couldn't identify at close range, and then having the Air Force, on the other hand, investigating, but then telling the public that there was nothing to it.
The incident at Exeter was the first in a series of UFO sightings which culminated a year later with mass sightings in Michigan. The public became increasingly dissatisfied with the military's official explanation, and a congressional hearing on UFOs was proposed by then Congressman Gerald Ford.
And he and other men and women in Congress felt that the Air Force was not handling the UFO problem properly because they were getting so many complaints from the public concerning their explanations and so forth.
Fowler's exhaustive report on the UFO encounter at Exeter was put into the congressional record. During the hearings on April 5, 1966, the committee presented the findings in Fowler's report to Air Force officials and asked for an explanation.
I felt that this particular case was interesting and that it showed that the Air Force wasn't really telling the truth to the public. They discussed the report, and the Air Force backed down and admitted that the object was unidentified.
Norman Muscarello's sighting had far-reaching effects on future UFO investigations. But for him, the incident at Exeter remains deeply personal.
I wish to hell it had never happened. No, I really do. I wish I could have just waltzed through life without this happening. I'd like to just be a normal person and like everybody else.